The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host, guest, random reptoid, or chupacabra may not necessarily reflect those of AM 950 Radio, its affiliates, or its sponsors. Now, it's time to step into the unknown. There are things people experience but never talk about. A shadow moving in the corner, flickering of the lights, a disembodied voice. We invite you to talk with us. Share your story, share your experience. Because this isn't just your story, this is our story. This is Ghostbox Radio with Greg Bakken.
And this is Ghostbox Radio on AM 950, where every night we talk about the paranormal, ufology, Bigfoot, and so much more. My name is Greg Bakken, and thank you very much for joining me today. You know, one of the things that I just, for some reason, I'm really excited about doing this nightly radio show is that you're inevitably going to be able to do one of these shows on a major milestone. And as this show goes out, it is the 60th anniversary of the assassination of John F. Kennedy. It is it's a major turning point in our country. It's had a vast amount of implications and ripples throughout history. I mean, I know that sounds very cliched, but I do think that it does apply here quite a bit. And one of the things I wanted to do to commemorate the 60th anniversary of the assassination of JFK is I wanted to have a conversation not only about that assassination conspiracy, because this is kind of what the show offers on occasion. We do a lot of paranormal stuff, but I felt that this is appropriate to talk about today. You know, the JFK assassination is a huge conspiracy, obviously, and there are there are many more conspiracy theories out there. And you know, it's so easy to bring people on to talk about conspiracy theories and how they are conspiracy theories, but I don't feel like that there's enough discussion on programs like mine where we talk about how conspiracy theories don't always stack up, you know, and that we really talk about that, and we talk about what creates a conspiracy theory, what people do, and what's the makeup of the people who are conspiracy theorists, and do they fall into any sort of like profile, perhaps? So tonight, I'm very excited. I have author Brian Dunning on. His book, which is available on Amazon, is called Conspiracy Theories Declassified, The Skeptoid Guide to the Truth Behind the Theories. And Brian's also does a podcast called The Skeptoid Podcast. I suggest you check it out. Brian, welcome to Ghostbox Radio.
Hey, I am so stoked to finally be here.
Right. I am too. I'm very happy that you're able to get me. And I'm supposed at this time of year, I mean, in general, you're a busy person, aren't you?
I am kind of insanely way over busified, yes.
I'm just kind of super busy. Yeah, no, I understand.
But it's all doing fun stuff like this, so I do not complain.
Absolutely. So, you know, during all this, I think it's interesting, and as you and I were talking prior to the program, that I do fall into some of the conspiracy theories, or at least I entertain them. And I do have to admit that the JFK one is one that I do entertain because maybe there's something about it that just seems so mundane about one person who was able to take down such a prominent world leader with absolutely, you know, which I think maybe you won't agree, but I still think that there are just so many circumstances that led up to that moment. And, you know, reading your book, Conspiracies Declassified, it's not a huge entry in the book about the JFK conspiracy theories, basically because you're just like, hey, Lee Harvey Oswald, he follows a profile of what we would establish later on as somebody who is you know, falls into that category of a killer. Mentally he's in that area, and he did it. And that's really what it comes down to.
I mean, yeah, really, basically. one of the points I make in the book is that he'd be a lot easier to convict today
Mm-hmm.
than he was back then. Back then, he was convicted on all of the evidence. All existing evidence points to him having been the killer. But today we have profiling, which we didn't, which was, not even in its infancy back then.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the killings that we have today, mass shootings are the ones that usually make the news. Lee Harvey Oswald fits the exact profile of the mass shooting guys that we have today. He's a loner. He's full of angst. He dislikes society. He's not popular, and he acts out with on his aggressions. That's exactly what we see every time there's one of these mass shootings in the news. That's exactly the case with Lee Harvey Oswald.
Yeah, I mean, and that's I was watching some stuff just because I find it all very interesting. And, one of the things that came to my mind was if Lee Harvey Oswald was never killed by Jack Ruby 2 days later, and he was actually able to stand trial, I think our history would have been completely different, at least in the realm of that, than it is today.
Yeah, I expect you're probably right. I think him going to trial would have made a difference. The author of we can't talk about the subject without mentioning Vince Bugliosi and his book Reclaiming History.
Mm-hmm.
1,600 pages on all of the conspiracy theories. Now he's an author, but he comes from a background as a prosecutor and a defense attorney. And after the JFK assassination, the BBC held a as big and as legitimate as they could a mock trial of Lee Harvey Oswald, and Bugliosi was the prosecutor, and he was able to successfully prosecute Oswald in absentia, obviously, for the crime. So, not that made any difference in people's tendency to believe conspiracy theories, but if it had been a real trial, who knows? Perhaps it may have.
Well, and that's just it. I mean, I feel like too, as much as I think that we might have a different history if Oswald had lived, at the same time, and I think this is kind of the overarching kind of message about conspiracy theories in general. I think there's such a distrust with the government, and it goes way back. I mean, I think that's kind of the at least for a lot of conspiracy theories, I think that's the ground level of it, and that no one's going to want to believe that there is a possibility that we are that maybe once in a while the truth is there in front of us, and that we're not able to accept it.
That's a very important point. All of the literally hundreds of conspiracy theories that exist about this assassination, they all have the same starting point, which is that the government is lying and the Warren Commission report is false. They start from that and they work backwards, finding what's consistent with this, who had Kennedy pissed off, who are all the possible people who may have had a reason to want to kill him, and what possibly could fit into the events of that day. And when you work it that way, sure, it's a surprise there's only hundreds of conspiracy theories. There's
Right.
virtually unlimited numbers you could come up with.
Well, and that's just it too. It's like, okay, there's a conspiracy, and if I'm going to believe one that's attached to the assassination of JFK, I think for me the strongest one is that it's like the CIA did not want him around. It's the old guard CIA that's even back from the Eisenhower administration, that they were concerned that he wanted to pull out of Vietnam by 1965 after his reelection bid, and okay, I mean that's hard to take anyway, because that's saying that we're no better than anywhere else that has any leadership that they just want to throw out and assassinate if it's not following our rules. The ones that really get me are the ones that, like, well, Marilyn Monroe has learned too much information about aliens from JFK when they had their affair, and so she had to be killed, and he was going to go public about UFOs, so therefore he had to be killed. I mean, those, as cool as they sound, Even I can't necessarily go along with that and just be like, Are you sure that's what's going on here?" Because that seems really, really unbelievable to me.
Yeah, but it's a perfect example how you could come up with literally anything you want to, and it fits into the find a version of it that fits into the events of the day just as well as that does.
And,
Why
and
not?
and it's all about narrative, isn't it? I mean, everything we do is about a narrative and fitting into our narrative or whatever else. And I think there is a big narrative that is attached to the JFK. That the overall arching thing is that we're being lied to. But there are things that have happened that don't add up. That keeps this going. Such as, I think there was a House committee in 1978 that came to the conclusion that there's probably more than one shooter, and it's just like, okay, well, how does that help anything? Because these things bring up more questions, and you never get answers.
Yeah, well, there's also House committees now talking about aliens visiting the Earth. So there's there's FBI. There's literally an FBI file on Elvis sightings. I mean, you can't talk about the fact that some people in government have been persuaded of some unusual belief as evidence that that unusual belief is true.
But I mean, perhaps though, the idea of doing like a House congressional committees may not always be a bad thing, because at least it's giving some sort of visibility. So the people who that they really want some kind of answers, at least it gives some sort of like there's something being that something's being testified about it. Do you see it that way at all, or do you see it more as like adding fuel to a fire?
No, I don't argue that having House committees is a bad thing or having hearings is a bad thing. I mean, it's a wonderful and important thing that we have the
Hmm.
ability to do that. But it's unfortunately a system that gets abused by a small number of Congress people can cause a hearing to happen that is about anything, no matter how ridiculous. I mean, history is full of examples of this. And the fact that such a hearing exists then communicates to the general public that, hey, the government thinks this is real.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that's not always the case.
No, and so I'm gonna be, you're I'm probably gonna be fodder for your book in a sense, because there are some things I do believe, and I do believe that there are aliens. That's just my personal opinion. But what I don't like is the congressional hearings that is everything seems to try to weaponize something against someone else, and I think that those, and I don't know if you followed any of those at all, but I feel like those congressional hearings is all about weaponizing people who want to believe in UFOs against the government, as if once again there is something else that is being kept quiet from us. And I have to say, as a disclaimer, I'm not trying to say that everything that we hear is necessarily true from the government, but I also don't think that everything we hear is also a lie. I think that's just a very oversimplification of how life works, and I don't think that that's fair.
Two statements that are definitely false is that everything is a lie and everything is true.
It's easy to live life actually that way, isn't it? You could, I
it,
mean,
that,
especially.
but I mean, it's funny you say that because that's one of the most basic reasons that conspiracy theories exist is that they take a large and complicated subject and they make it very small and easy to understand.
Yeah. Yo, no, I get that. That's actually very, that makes a lot of sense, because I think there's a lot of cases, and we all have our different beliefs, but I think there's a lot of cases where these things are 2 + 2 = 5. I mean, it's just they are putting stuff together that, without any sort of research, you can look at maybe something and be like, oh, I can see that might make some sense. But then when you start digging a little bit deeper, that's when it all starts to fall apart. But yet, the thing is, no, I feel like a lot of people who are into this, they don't want to even entertain the idea that they could be wrong, that there could be a rational explanation for what they're so worked up over.
I agree.
Yeah, well, there we go.
I have nothing.
We're
no
we're gonna wrap this up early.
I could have said the same thing.
Well, I mean, it just seems, and that's just it, though. I mean, I just find it very, it's actually very frustrating because that's the same sort of thing that's going on in general, I think, out there. And I'm certainly not, I'm not a political program, but I feel like that there's a lot of that happening in general where it's kind of like the memes that you see on Facebook or something where, here's a picture. I saw one the other day of here's a picture of Pierce Brosnan as at 24, and it looks like a child that's like 10 that is like some weird Photoshop pose. And I see everybody just like, oh wow, he looks so young. He looks so. It's clearly fake, and it's like it's that sort of mentality that people don't want to do any research. They just want to. They just want to be spoon fed. I feel like, and that doesn't help anything.
No, it doesn't help anything, and it's not something that's particular today. It's just a fundamental of human nature. This has been the case throughout all of human history. People are much more willing to accept the simple popular explanation for something that's large and complicated than they are to sit down and do the extra work and find out what's really going on.
Absolutely. Why don't
That's
we go?
the whole reason that I have a job.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Right. Exactly. Let's go ahead and do this. We're gonna take our first break. When we come back, we're gonna continue our conversation with Brian Dunning. We're talking about conspiracy theories, and it's a little bit different. We're not talking about what they are. We're talking what they're not. You're listening to Ghostbox Radio on AM 950. And welcome back to Ghostbox Radio. My name is Greg Bach, and tonight we are commemorating the 60th anniversary of the JFK assassination, and we're talking about the conspiracy theories around that. More than not, though, we're just going to be talking conspiracy theories in general. Tonight, my guest is Brian Dunning, and he wrote a book that's available on Amazon, Conspiracy Declassified, The Skeptoid Guide to the Truth Behind the Theories. Brian also does a podcast called the Skeptoid Podcast, and definitely check it out. If you're willing, I'm going to say this, check it out if you're willing to entertain the idea that maybe things in these conspiracy theories are not what they seem, right? I mean, that's kind of the difference there. You're not going to be there saying that, oh yeah, the moon landing's fake and here's why. You're going to be very much the opposite of that.
That is true. I mean, when people hear a conspiracy theory, they either recognize it right away as being nonsense, such as how most people would react if they heard the moon landing was a hoax, or they don't know anything about the subject and they assume that, okay, well, now I know something about that, and they tend to accept it, and they've just become a conspiracy theorist without even knowing it.
That's true. And I think what's really interesting about what you just said there too is the idea of like, just because you throw a lot of random like sentences at somebody, they don't constitute as facts. And I think when you say like there's people who don't, they don't know enough about it, and they hear someone talk about it, and if someone throws a lot of like unconnected pieces to that, it's easy for someone to be like, oh wow, sounds like you've researched it, and I'm going to follow, and this I believe you now.
Yeah, that's true. The fact is that most people don't think about things like this very much.
Mm-hmm.
You and I do, because this is what we do for a living, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're kind of immersed in weird things.
Yeah.
That whole genre. Most people aren't. Most people don't think about science topics. They don't think about important moments in history. And when someone tells them something, blah, 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 whatever it is, it's probably the first time they've thought about it since they were in elementary school.
Right.
And so you go, oh, okay, well, now I know that JFK was killed by some shadowy conspiracy. And when you hear the statistic that more than half of Americans now believe there was more than one shooter, that's really the reason. It's not because half of Americans have sat down and carefully analyzed all of the evidence that was presented to the Warren Commission and all this. It's because they've just vaguely heard something, and that's all they know on the subject.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And That it's very true that I think that the majority of people may have an opinion on something that's a conspiracy theory, but they don't give it any real thought about it. Like they don't really care. If you randomly ask somebody on the street, do you think the JFK assassination, that there is more to it than Lee Harvey Oswald shooting the president? I'm sure probably most people would actually be like, maybe. There might be more, but they don't, like you said, they're not going to go into it and really dig and read the books like some of us who are just interested in that genre. And I think that's a really good point. One of the ones that's in your book that I had to laugh about, being a big Beatles fan, is the Paul McCartney died in what, 1967 or whatever it
Paul is
was.
dead. Yeah, yeah.
Paul's dead, and I forgot about that. To the point that Paul released a live album in the '90s called "Paul Is Live" because it was a live album.
My gosh, I remember doing the research for that was such a deep dive. There was that Beatles fan magazine. What was it called? God, I can't remember what it's called. I was on eBay buying these old copies from the 1960s of this fan magazine, and I had this stack of them. And going through and reading all of these articles, this letter to the editor from a fan that heard Paul is dead and all this stuff, and reading the responses and all the articles. It was a crazy deep dive into some really obscure old stuff.
I really like to think that no one thinks that anymore. Like, we've moved on, and I mean, first of all, congratulations to to John, Ringo, and George. If Paul did die, boy, did they luck out with finding someone who looked very much like him then, and also as talented. Because out of the Beatles, that are, and especially still alive, Paul seems to have the upper hand with the popularity. So, boy,
Yeah.
just imagine.
Whatever else you can say about Paul McCartney, he was a very, very rare musical genius.
Right. So, I mean, of all the people to say that was killed and you have a doppelganger in his place, that's probably the toughest one to really believe,
he doesn't switch in and out quite so easily, does he?
Right.
I just realized I said he was a musical genius. He's not a was, he's an is.
Well,
he's still around.
But now people listening, they're like, he knows. He's part of the machine.
Dunning just slipped. He let it out that he knows Paul was assassinated and replaced with a doppelganger.
Right. Just like the fact that we know that JFK is still around. But I mean, hey, that's how it goes. This is kind of off topic. I don't know if you had seen this. Speaking of the JFK stuff, and of course, because I'm just speaking off the top of my head, I'll get none of the facts right. But I was watching the CNN. They do the Sunday night. They do a kind of the inside story, and they did one on a man who basically led a cult over the JFK assassination, that he believed, it was like 5 years ago, that JFK was going to return in kind of the guise of Jesus Christ, and that he had thousands of people who followed him, who believed it, and they actually went to the spot of the assassination on the day that he believed that JFK was going to return. And might be news to you, he did not return. Spoiler alert: he is not alive. But it's just when those theories and those areas go into really bizarre areas. It's like, okay, you want to believe that it was an inside job, go for it. But when you start creating a cult from it, and it's just like, is this person, does he need mental help, or does he know exactly what he's doing? I just find it very fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't heard that one, by the way. That's wonderful. But
oh, it's wonderful. Yeah,
I had heard the one that was popular among the QAnon community, that they believed JFK Jr., John, was still alive and was going to return to be Donald Trump's running mate. And I'm like, you guys know that he was a lifelong Democrat, right? If he did survive his plane crash and is somehow still alive, probably running with Trump would not be at the top of his agenda.
It may not be unless well, I'm not even gonna get into it, but yes, I mean that is something. And I think JFK Jr. was part of this also, this one as well. And I think we actually might be kind of tail ending each other on, because I think they actually do they do converge at some point, both of these, because I do, that part you're telling me about does sound very familiar at all. There is one conspiracy theory that I'm sure it's in the book, but I didn't look because I just refuse. I absolutely refuse to even entertain the idea that this could possibly be an inside job, a conspiracy theory, any of that, and that is 9/11. I refuse to even entertain that idea because it's the fact that it could possibly be true, which I don't think it is possibly true, but the fact that anyone would think of that as a false flag is absolutely devastating for me to even think about.
Yeah, the interesting thing about that is when I was working with the publisher to come up with originally there were going to be 50 conspiracy theories. There's a
Hmm.
few more than that in the book, but originally it was supposed to be a book about 50 popular conspiracy theories, and we're whittling down the list to just the best 50. And they said, oh, we can't have 9/11 included in the book at all. And I said, if you're publishing a book about conspiracy theories and you don't have 9/11 truthers in there,
Yeah,
then not only are you, it's gaping, it's the most gaping omission possible,
really is.
but you are now throwing fuel on the fire of the people who say, oh, they're trying to cover it up. The publisher doesn't want people to think that this is just a conspiracy theory because they know that it's actually real. I said, you're getting yourself in for some trouble if you don't want to include that in the book.
That is absolutely. I mean that really. Yeah, if you really want to get things going, I mean, it's already bad enough that you have confirmed that Paul McCartney is in fact been dead for
I
50
did.
some years.
I did.
But just all of that is just, it's really pretty funny that that they didn't think of that. Do you think that was because it's still so raw? I mean, not about the conspiracy side of it, but just because it's recent history to us still, 2 years ago or whatever.
Yeah. Well, they told me their reason for that, which was that they felt it was just too controversial,
Yeah.
which I did not agree with, obviously, and I
No.
argued, and I think they finally relented. That this happened with another thing. They didn't want to talk about Holocaust denial,
Oh.
um, and I said basically the same thing. That if you don't include Holocaust denial, then you're in. It can be seen as the Simon and Schuster is acknowledging
Yeah.
that the Holocaust didn't actually happen. It's not just a conspiracy theory.
It,
And
and those that's we're at a time in our history that we have to speak about those things, especially
absolutely,
especially the Holocaust denial stuff, because to your point, it does leave a gaping hole. It opens up a lot of questions to your publisher. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it's like people are, if someone would have said that people are saying that 15 years ago, I think I would have just been like, well, that's a fringe amount. But these are not fringe anymore. These are people who are seeing stuff that they probably never were fringe, but because maybe my circle of friends or whatever else, it just seemed fringe, and now it's becoming like the stuff is getting momentum, and there need to be people to actually uh, to speak up against it, even if it's just as simple as this is why this is not true, which is a big part of it.
yeah. I wish there was more interest in the subject of this is why this is not true,
Yeah.
because that's actually an analysis and a thought process. It's not just a list of claims, a list of events. When you give a conspiracy theory, you're just saying this, and this happened. Oh, okay, that's interesting. But when you get into analyzing why that's not true, that to me is a much more fascinating topic. And for the reader slash listener slash consumer, it's kind of more work. So I'm not surprised that it's not super
Hmm.
popular, but I'm disappointed that it's not super popular. I wish more people had an interest in the process of how we determine what's real from what's not.
Well, and like you said, I think it is so much more work to actually be able to explain why something's not real. It's very easy to, I think, to say why something is real, like a conspiracy, and throw together disassembled and disseparate pieces to kind of get your point across. And like we said, people don't really want to think, and I don't mean that as like I people are dumb and they don't know what they're doing. It's just that we have so much going on in our lives. Some people just they hear and like that's good enough, and that's how it is. It's so much easier to just kind of throw that out there than to actually do the due diligence, which is not easy to find out where things don't make sense and try to make sense out of them so people can understand.
Yeah, I mean, I have part of my job is being an expert in a certain number of things, including, like, for example, the history of flying saucer belief.
Mm-hmm.
Someone who's a realtor or an accountant or a lawyer, that's their business, that's their interest, that's their expertise all day long. They don't ever have time to sit and say, okay, now I'm going to add this onto my plate. Hearing some brief passing mention is all that people have time or interest for.
Yeah, I mean, and I'd like to say that that's just because of the world we live in at the moment, but clearly not. Conspiracy theories have been around for a long time, so it's certainly not necessarily like only recently. I mean, I think it might be quicker now, perhaps, and it might spread quicker. But I mean, these things have been around for a very long time. Probably. Do you know what the first conspiracy theory is? And I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Nobody does. I mean, you can go back to the plague, for example.
Sure.
In the 1200s, 1300s, whenever the plague was happening in Europe, and you read what the conspiracy theories were then, and they're identical to the COVID-19 conspiracy theories that we have today. The names are different, and it's the Wuhan lab instead of Israel, or the Zion. But they were blaming the Jews for the plague, and the evidence that they were presenting and everything. It was so similar to COVID-19 today. It's really amazing to me how over hundreds and thousands of years, the names and places might change, but the nature of belief in misinformation has not changed at all. Human nature's desire, their thirst for information, regardless of its accuracy, that confirms their pre-existing worldview, that has never changed. I don't expect it ever will, which is sad. But yeah, the first conspiracy theory, when was the first person?
Right.
That's probably what it was.
Right. That like it goes back to dinosaurs or something, right?
Something to do with the Thagomizer.
Why don't we go ahead and do this? Let's go ahead and take our next break. When we come back, we're going to talk more about conspiracy theories. Also want to talk about the Skeptoid podcast and other things that Brian has going on. You're listening to Ghostbox Radio on AM 950. And welcome back to Ghostbox Radio on AM 950. My name is Greg Bach, and thank you very much for joining me. Don't forget to join us tomorrow. We're going to have on my friends Robert and Mike, and we are talking about today we're talking about the 60th anniversary of the JFK assassination. Tomorrow we're talking about the 60th anniversary of one of my favorite television shows, Doctor Who. It celebrates it. It was November 23rd that the very first episode aired. They actually had to repeat the very first episode of Doctor Who the following week because no one was paying attention because of all the coverage of the JFK assassination. So it's one of my favorite shows. I consider Doctor Who to kind of be the history of television because it's wrapped through all the eras of how television was made. So it'll be a fun conversation, and I look forward to celebrating a show that I love very much. But we are having a fantastic conversation with Brian Dunning, the author of Conspiracies Declassified, The Skeptoid Guide to the Truth Behind the Theories. That book is available on Amazon, and I picked it up, and I'm enjoying it. It's really well researched, and it covers off on a lot of different topics. And Brian, your Skeptoid podcast, how often do you release new episodes?
So yeah, that's kind of my main gig. It's a weekly show every Tuesday morning since 2006.
Wow.
And yes, that's 17 years of doing a podcast, which is insane.
Which is really crazy because there's only like 3 conspiracy theories, isn't there? But
only 3, yes. So I've had to rotate the 3 each week for making 900 something episodes now.
What are you covering off? Because obviously you're not just covering off like conspiracy theories, but as a skeptoid, you know, that what else are you looking at in
Skeptoid is basically the true science, true history behind urban legends. So whatever these urban legends are, they can be conventional urban legends, they can be paranormal claims, conspiracy theories, alternative medicine schemes, anything that where in pop culture you have a lot of people believing something that's not true, but that also has more interesting real science behind it. So it's not a debunking show.
Yeah.
I mean, often it's necessary to point out, hey, Bigfoot is not real because of this, but here is the more interesting reasons why we know that and what's really cool about that.
Mm-hmm,
so
mm-hmm.
I try to make it an inherently positive show, not an inherently negative show, which is an easy trap to fall into if you're addressing urban legends.
It is. It's tough because I mean I think that, you know, and I've certainly put myself in here as well. A lot of my listenership, they you know, they listen because they do believe in a lot of this type of thing. But I also urge people to get out of your comfort zone and pick up the book or listen to the podcast. If you listen and read, it doesn't mean that your ability to believe in this stuff goes away, but maybe it offers some information that you weren't aware of, or that, you know, just a different viewpoint.
That is true. There's, you know, it's any urban legend or any weird thing, whatever you want to say, is interesting by itself. But when you put it in context, it becomes far more interesting. Context meaning where and when and why it happened.
Yeah.
What was going on in society at that time, why this became a thing and other similar cases didn't become things. Context is so important. And that's where the real fascinating info is not just hearing more about this particular UFO story. It's about why that particular UFO story became big.
Right.
And I just love the process of digging deeper.
Right, and it's present, and anytime you can present research, I think that really opens up for a lot of people to be able to make up their own minds too, and figure out and maybe get them to do research in other areas of either that or other similar topics.
You just hit it on the head, because one of the questions people ask me all the time is they say, "Oh, my grandma believes her poodle is psychic," or whatever
Mm-hmm.
it is. Do you have an episode I can play for her that'll disabuse her of that belief? And I say, well, maybe I do, but don't play that for her. Don't directly challenge this belief that she has. Instead, play an episode for her that's about something you both agree with. Like, you know, just as an example, Loch Ness Monster.
Sure.
Let's say nobody believes in the Loch Ness Monster. I would say, play that episode for her, because there's a lot of really interesting information. And it's going to get her interested in the process. And she may come around on her own to questioning whether her poodle really is psychic, or if there's some very cool perceptual phenomenon going on that's a better explanation.
Absolutely, and you know, I'm very now interested in psychic poodle. I'm looking forward to finding out more about him or her. Right? Who wouldn't be? A psychic poodle is here to help. Psychic poodle is 2024 going to be better. You know, I mean, that's of course. So what, like this last Tuesday, what did you release? What was on the episode that you released on Tuesday?
So this week's episode was on the mythical planet Nibiru. that
Oh,
some people believe is on a
other
huge
side,
orbit that
other side
comes
of the
by
sun,
the Earth
right?
every. Yeah, it's like a really eccentric orbit, and it comes by. I think it was every 3,600 years or something like that,
Yeah.
and disrupts life on Earth and all that stuff.
Now that's not the planet that has the reptoids, is it?
No, the reptoids come from Zeta Reticuli, I believe.
I'm such a fool. I don't, I want to believe in reptoids. I really do. I mean,
I don't know. I used to watch. Was it Land of the Lost that had those the slee
yeah,
stacks?
the slee stacks. Yeah,
Those are pretty alarming. I'm
they
not
are.
sure I'd want those to be real.
I mean, I've seen pictures, and I know that they're photo anomalies of people, and they look like they have reptilian eyes and stuff. And you're like, well, that'd be cool. I mean, it's like V. Do you remember V at all? The sci-fi movie in the '80s, and they came as
Sure.
humanoids, and you rip off their face, and they're reptiles underneath. I mean, that would explain a lot. I think that if that was real, that would explain an awful lot. I think in the world at the moment. I don't know. Every time I try to get someone on who knows about reptoids, the study about it, whatever, they don't want to come on, and I find that very interesting. You think that you'd want to spread the word, but I guess
Well,
not.
again, not to be repetitive, but that's a case where the main reptoid belief, that came from David Icke, the British conspiracy theorist, that an old poor quality video of Queen Elizabeth, the compression in the video glitched and it showed that it interrupted her electronic disguise or whatever. That's one thing, but the context of the whole reptoid thing, half reptilian humans, that has a much richer and deeper history, that is very cool to go into. So, never just stop at the popular version of the legend,
Right.
whether it's true or not. Instead, go in and learn about the context.
Well, and I think too, if you are someone who has a very strong standpoint about conspiracy or reptoids or whatever else, and you are public, that you do a job like you do of publicly stating about it and stuff, you have to look at both sides to be able to be to really call yourself someone who researches it. You have to look into it to be able to know where to start and where to go from with it. They should be doing the same thing as well, because it's the full story, it's the full picture.
Yeah, yeah. You have to. A very important part of that is getting information from all sides. Um,
Yeah.
some urban legends end up being surprisingly true, and a lot of them end up being false. And so you need to make that determination and find out where the real evidence is. You have to listen to both sides on both of those conspiracy theories. So you always have to seek out information that's not what you're inclined to believe,
Hmm.
as well as the information that you are inclined to believe, because you're going to learn something from both.
Research isn't always safe, is it? I mean, if you have a strong personal belief, it isn't always safe, and in the sense that, like, it takes you out of your comfort zone. It's going to make you can't just research with the facts that you are happy with. You have to look at everything.
Yeah, but that's part of the reason that I love, my whole circle of friends is all people who are either science communicators or work in the sciences. And part of the reason I love these people is because to a scientist, there is nothing more exciting than finding out that you're wrong.
Sure. Yeah. I get that. I understand that. At least in that community as well. I certainly can see that. We have about 5 minutes left.
Okay.
What are you working on? I would not worked on, but you're talking about a UFO film. What's
Yeah.
going on?
I mean, Skeptoid Media, the company that produces my podcast, we're a nonprofit and an educational nonprofit. And one of the things we do, in addition to video media and podcasts, is documentary films. We're always working on a documentary film, and the most recent one is about the public interest in the UFO phenomenon, which has
Mm.
been enormous
Yeah.
these last few years. So this is a whole. The way I like to describe it is it's a film that teaches astronomy using the public interest in UFOs as a springboard. It's called the UFO movie They Don't Want You to See. And that title is a little bit tongue in cheek, but you watch it and you'll understand why we went with that. The movie is not yet in wide distribution yet. You can watch it online. You can rent it online, but it's at the UFO.movie. If anyone wants to check it out, you can watch the trailers and if you want, you can rent it, but it will eventually come out on all the streaming services. It's brand new. It just hasn't gotten there yet.
Wow, that's gonna be really cool. I got to check that out. And so you can rent it from the site then.
Yeah, it goes to Vimeo. Vimeo is the service
Got it.
that it's on available for rental.
Got it. How long have you been
UFO.movie.
UFO.movie? How long have you been working on that?
UFO.movie.
What is it? I'm sorry, I talked over you.
The UFO.movie.
Got it. Yeah,
and I didn't know there was a .movie suffix for websites, but apparently there is.
There seems to be a lot more. Remember back in the day, it was only gov, com, and org, and that you can't go. Or and then when TV came out, like, what's happening? Is this even real? It's just we've been doing internet for far too long. How long have you been working on that film then?
That film started. I went into production just over a year ago, and so it's been for about the past 6 months. It's been in post production, and then going into starting the whole distribution and film festival process. It's done great in film festivals. Got a number of wins already.
Wow! Congratulations!
Very excited about that.
Yeah, that's congratulations. That's great.
Yeah, thank you.
Any upcoming topics that you could share with us for the podcast?
Let's see. Let me go into the database. Oh yes. Next week's is going to be a lot of fun. Have you heard of this popular drug called Combo?
No, but tell me more. Do I have to worry about FCC with this? No.
I don't think so. This is a totally unregulated substance.
What is it?
So it comes from Brazil. It's actually Kumbo or something like that. I can't quite pronounce it, but it is tree frog poison. So they scrape the poison off of tree frogs, and then you burn your skin and you spread some of this paste into the burns, and you will then go into projectile vomiting and uncontrollable diarrhea for an hour.
And the benefits of this would be what now?
None, unless you enjoy that particular process. And so it's extremely popular among certain demographics like Silicon Valley people. And I don't want to burst anyone's balloon, but Silicon Valley people are largely the most gullible people on the planet. So if there's something like this, an opportunity for them to spend their money on, you can be sure. Anyway, it's called Combo, and it's look it up online, Kambo. Or subscribe to Skeptoid and learn all about it next week.
Well, absolutely. And also, are people taking that as if like it's almost like a version of getting high sort of thing? Like
no, it doesn't get you high.
No.
It's a very unpleasant experience. They believe that it brings all kinds of wellness benefits.
Like burns.
It leaves scars. It's a horrible, horrible process. I mean, it's poison. It's from a frog intended to kill you. So you're literally putting lethal poison in your body and barely surviving the experience. And someone has decided that Silicon Valley people are willing to pay hundreds and hundreds of dollars for this privilege.
Now we're just under a minute left here. Can we quickly talk about NPR? Is that starting up for you soon, or is it already going? Or
we're hoping that'll become available in 2024. But the Skeptoid podcast, we are producing a version of it that is going to go into what's called the Public Radio Exchange, which is basically a catalog where NPR affiliate stations purchase all of their content that gets aired on their stations. So hopefully in 2024, NPR stations near you will be carrying Skeptoid.
That would be really cool. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, that is fantastic. And that just finishes us up. We're just right in time here. So definitely, folks, go to Amazon, pick up Conspiracy Theories or Conspiracies to Classify, the Skeptoid Guide to the Truth Behind the Theories. That is available on Amazon, and also check out Skeptoid Podcast. Brian Dunning, thank you very much for joining me today.
Loved being here. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you very much. Tomorrow we're talking Doctor Who. Have a great night, everyone.